So it is up to the current generation. You know, I used to talk a lot, and people still do talk about, you know, we have to quit doing this and running up this debt, or we'll pass it on to the next generation. Guess what? We are the next generation, and we have to deal with the debt and the crisis that we have today. But the one thing that we can't do is nibble away and tinker with the budget and not change a philosophy. This is why the revolution that's going on now is a idealistic, it's a theoretical revolution, and a change on what government should do. The founders had a very clear understanding what government should do, and the government was not to be very complicated. The Constitution is not that complicated. You know, nobody in Congress can read those bills and understand them, but most Americans can read the Constitution and understand the Constitution. The founders asked the questions, well, when they were living under the oppression of the king, and they said it's too much government, too much abuse of our civil liberties, too many military officers marching into our houses, and they didn't like the role of the king, and they did not like it. Now, the founders were very well educated. They were educated in the classics, they were educated in biblical history, and they knew that the type of government that they had was not the kind they wanted. So they asked the question, what should the role of government be? And their answer simply was, a true republic, the role of government is to defend liberty. No more complicated than that. Run the economy, it's not to run your personal life, and it's certainly not to police the world. That is not part of it. But somewhere along the way, systematically, these concepts were undermined, and the concept of liberty was divided up into pieces. Instead of seeing liberty as an individual issue where you have the right to your life, and you have a right to your money. You have the right to run your social and religious life outside of what the government says, and also your economic life. But over the last 50 years, there's been one group that, you know, sort of defends economic liberty, and another group sort of defends civil liberties. But it's all one and the same. We have come to think that because we got off on a tangent in our early history, because certain groups were punished. You know, they had less liberties than others. There's still a little bit of that. Is that working? How about that? Okay. How are we doing now? Are we back again? No. Worked up real fast. Now let me see, where was I? I was talking about liberty, I'm sure of that. And that economic liberty and social liberty is one and the same, because we get our rights as individuals, and our rights come from our Creator. In our early history, we did have abuse of groups because we saw people as part of a group. And that is wrong. There's still some of that going on. I think there's abuse in our judicial system, because when you see the enforcement of drug laws and a few other things, certain groups are punished much more so than other groups. So we are far from a perfect delivering of justice in this country. But we've drifted away from, you know, a real abuse in a collective sense. But just because we know that we're not supposed to punish people because they belong to a group, but we're not supposed to give privileges to groups because they belong to a group. And shouldn't have hyphenated rights. We shouldn't have special privileges because we belong to a group. It can't be by gender or by race or anything else. But nobody can be punished, and nobody gets benefits. Everybody gets equal protection under the law, and that's what would happen in a true republic. Unfortunately, the attack in Washington, D.C. is an attack on civil liberties, but the tragedy there is it's an attack on all Americans, what's going on right now. It is an attack in a narrow sense in one group, but what is happening, I think, is very, very serious. And we just had, it's about a year ago, I think it was in February last year, the administration sent a representative to the Senate, and he testified that they changed their policy. Unilaterally, the executive branch changed the policy, and the president declared that he had the authority to assassinate American citizens without process. And he proved his point. He's done it on 3 occasions, including one 16-year-old boy that was out barbecuing to make his point. But this whole idea that because somebody seems to be a bad person, is no justification of it. The worse the person is, the more necessary it is to make sure that they get justice, to make sure that we always have justice in the court system. You know, if the Nazi war criminals had a trial, and Timothy McVeigh had a trial, and Adolf Eichmann had a trial after many years in Israel, there's no reason for us to assume that this president, or any president, has this type of authority. This is embarking on a path that we should not prevent. The president declared this unilaterally, and his justification is, and this is his interpretation of the Constitution. He says, if it's not prohibited in the Constitution, I can do anything I want. And there's a lot of people who have been taught that in our schools. I mean, this comes from the far left, but some on the right who don't understand it as well either. But that's not the way the Constitution is written. It's written, thou shalt not do anything unless you have the explicit authority to do it. Although the president has done these things unilaterally, the Congress has participated, assuming the same thing. And last year, just so recently, and this unfortunately, even in the House where we have control in the House, they agree with the president sometimes on the wrong things. On some of these attacks on civil liberties and some of these wars we're fighting, we have the right, the conservatives, on the side of the president. So what did the Congress do? You know, just in December, a bill was signed January 1st by the president. He said that posse comitatus no longer exists under the National Defense Authorization Act. He claims that the U.S. military has the proper authority to arrest any Americans that they want to. And they can do this and deny a lawyer, put in a prison secretly, and held indefinitely, and no trial whatsoever. That is not, can you imagine what the founders would think? That we did this, we passed a law and said nothing? But the one thing that I know, a lot of Americans are willing to say something when they hear about this. Matter of fact, I have been so impressed in the last 2 months by just bringing this subject up. Just say National Defense Authorization Act. And everybody knows the bad parts of the National Defense Authorization Act. So the American people have heard about this, and I can be quite certain you didn't hear it on national evening news. The attack on our civil liberties have been bad for the last 10 years. I recall very much, as every one of us did, on 9/11. It was a disastrous day for us. There's been a lot of confusion on explaining it and some disagreement. But I'll tell you one thing. My conclusion is that we were not attacked because we were free and prosperous. There were other reasons involved on that. But at that time, for several years, there had been a bill floating around that they had tried to pass. They didn't have the sentiment. There was a country that they wanted to invade, but they weren't able to galvanize the people behind it. But guess what? We started invading the countries that had nothing to do with 9/11. I voted for the authority to go after those individuals who were responsible. A person like bin Laden, guess what? It took us 10 years to find him after occupying 2 Arab countries, plus a few more, doing things that we shouldn't have been done and ignoring the things that we were supposed to be doing. Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. There was no Al-Qaeda there, and there was a plan to invade and take over Iraq a long time. I remember the first speech I gave against going to war against Iraq. It was in 1998, because that is when they changed the policy. There was a resolution that it was our policy for regime change. I said, this is going to lead to war. Took a few years, but it led to war. They were looking for the right opportunity. But it was the same way domestically, attack on our civil liberties. They had a bill floating around. They did not call it, but it was finally called. But there was a bill to attack on our privacy, a virtual repudiation of the Fourth Amendment. So within a week or so, that bill was brought to the floor. It was called the Patriot Act. Patriot Act was passed rather easily. There weren't very many in opposition, but I'll bet you can guess how I voted. I remember it very clearly because I was annoyed with the process. I was sitting next to another member of Congress, and he was voting for it. And I said, why are you voting for this? We've only had it on the floor. Although the bill had been around, the final version had not been available to us for about an hour. And here, this major undertaking was put on the floor in less than an hour of debate, so we ended up voting.